Welcome again to all of our participants. Thank you for being here. It's really exciting to see so many people joining us today.
It's time to get to know you a bit as well. Our first question is, where are you from? And we have people from Germany, Ukraine, Switzerland. It's really nice to welcome people from different countries in our session today.
Every state has some period that we can call a difficult history, and it's kind of a heritage that still lives in our minds and shapes our present. It leads to fundamental disagreements over who we are, what values we share as a society.
So I'll start immediately with some kind of statement about history, that history functions at three levels. As affirmative history, which expresses certain kind of politics and which provides grounds for certain kinds of politics. There is also didactical history, which holds that history teaches us something, that it is the history is a teacher of life. And finally, history also functions as an analytical history, as a academic discipline, as something which at least pretends to be a science.
So when we are looking at memory studies, we quite often see that literature would focus mostly on either memory politics, certain mnemonic practices, or even if they shift focus from the national or all-nation level to the local levels, they still would be focusing on certain historical events or certain social groups who are bearers of certain memory or memory narratives. And quite often in these studies, IDPs or migrants are lost because they constitute the real minority within majority of those localities, and quite often are described as inaccessible because it's very difficult to get them into sample or to find them if you don't know how to look for the displaced population.
Our team was driven by questions: what motivates people to participate, what are forms and possibilities for being active, and what citizens require, maybe even from governments, to be more proactive in their engagement in different processes. And these are the reasons we choose these topics together with our wish to show people how they can stand with Ukraine and stand with their own country.
Most immigrants that we've interviewed within the Mobilize project that my institution is part of have supported the Euromaidan in some way, from being engaged emotionally to donation of money or to participation in actions in their residence country. And even though there was some post-Euromaidan disillusionment, they have continued to refer to Euromaidan as generally positive and important experience in their lives.
Civic participation is an extremely important part of modern Ukrainian culture, which helps young people, firstly, to contribute to Europe integration processes in Ukraine, and secondly, to help Ukraine win the war.
So what I understood from our discussion is that the digital platforms or social media, they're very well used and very efficient also, but I found there was a really interesting comment about trust, that of course we can help through transparency to increase trust, but meeting physically is also very useful, right? And so the combination of social media and maybe a walk together or meeting up in small groups can be really efficient also and useful.
This is also another problem I have when it comes to civic participation. Sometimes it's so overwhelming because there are so many movements, so many NGOs and groups and initiatives you can join, and you also have to kind of decide which is the most important for me, because it's time consuming, energy consuming, maybe even money consuming to engage yourself. So what I wish would be like a better overview about movements that already exist. Maybe this could be a governmental website where we could have an overview about protests that will happen in my city in the next time. Yeah, things like this.
I think that's a really important point that we also see reflected in the comments that we received on Menti. Like, what motivates you when you see actual results? When you see, or what do you need? You need to see more impact and more results of the participation that you actually do. Because if you devote your time and other resources to participation, and that's also the same for me, and there's just no change, there's no impact, nothing is acted on, and at some point I get frustrated.
Well, basically it comes down to a level of disintegration in the Ukrainian society between the decision makers, the politicians, and the people which like term themselves as like regular people. So they often see that outside of some kind of protests, it's very hard to influence the politicians. What would be one of my suggestions based on what I've heard from these people is establishing some kind of communication, some kind of response to the civic initiatives on the everyday level. So something that's related to the city life, to civic budgeting, and so on and so forth. That's already starting to be implemented in Ukraine. I think that's actually an important way to reestablish this missing link in the feedback between the population and the decision makers.
You have to be very vocal. You have to boast in a good way, about this success, and give the cheers and glory to the simple guys who have achieved this change.
And that was one of the environmental organizations in Ukraine that are right now collecting environmental crimes. And they do this because they want to show the world or communicate what an effect the war can have to the environment or to the population. And also they want to help the Ukrainian authorities in order to collect these crimes and bring them to the international court.
Експерти зазначають, такі явища, які характерні внаслідок забруднення атмосфери, як метеорологічні явища, тобто утворення газових аерозольних речовин, які далі потім випадають у вигляді кислотних дощів і забруднюють ґрунти, збільшують кислотність ґрунтів. Також зазначається, що є високий ризик впливу війни в Україні на кліматичні зміни.
And Russia is deliberately shelling Ukrainian agricultural lands. As the speaker before told, there is a burnout land and contamination of agricultural lands. After the shellings, the holes are very big, and the contamination with sulfur, for example, is quite high. Some experts say that it will take up to 10 years for this land, which was burnt out, to recover and to be fruitful again. So this war has long-term consequences on that.
The answer to the Russian aggression and energy aggression would be the green development of the cities.
Thank you so much for your time and for your patience and for the insightful discussion.
Thank you everyone, and hope to see you next year with our new team.